it is Al McCarn with Founded in Truth. Welcome back to another Current Event Simplified. Let's get straight to today's presentation. It is June 25th, 2020, which means it's the 144th anniversary of the Battle of Little Bighorn. And we have some lessons from the Little Bighorn that are relevant to right now. So let's get into it. Now, here is the iconic painting by Samuel Paxson from 1899. There you see General Custer standing on the hill with his beleaguered troopers of the 7th Cavalry. They are assaulted on all sides by native warriors of the Sioux and Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. And before long, all 210 of these 7th Cavalry troopers will be dead. This iconic image is what has inspired Americans for 100 years or more, and including Hollywood. We have a number of feature films over the last many decades that have covered the or depicted the Battle of Little Bighorn in one way or the other, and all of them pretty much rely on the same imagery. So is it accurate? Well, pretty much, as far as we know. The fact is the 7th Cavalry and General Custer are revered as heroes, which is why they have memorials there fitting for heroes. Here is the Little Bighorn National Battlefield Park in Montana, and you'll see the Last Stand Hill, as it's called. There is a cemetery, a national cemetery, where the remains of the 7th Cavalry troopers are interred. There is a monument to the 7th Cavalry on top of that hill with the names of all the troopers engraved on the sides. You can see it here in this picture, so this gives you a little bit of scale. This is the path going up from the visitor center. There's General Custer's original grave site. Now, his remains were moved to West Point early in the 20th century, and that is where he lies now. But originally his body lay here in this cemetery. And you'll see headstones all around the park because this was a running battle of men on horses, and soldiers and Indian warriors were fell all across the battlefield. So a fitting memorial. The question is, what was this battle all about? What was this war all about? Let's talk about that. Now, here's Custer. You can call him Colonel Custer or General Custer. Either one is correct. He was a general in the Union Army in the Civil War. When the war ended, the Army reduced its size significantly, and he reverted to his permanent rank of Lieutenant Colonel. So call him General, call him Colonel. Either way is correct. Then there's Sitting Bull, one of the most influential chiefs of the Lakota Nation. Notice I said Lakota. That is the name that they call themselves. Others call them the Sioux Nation. Sioux is actually a derogatory term that their enemies called them. So I prefer to call them by the name they prefer, Lakota. It's not like Sitting Bull was the commander of the Indian Army. No, he was one of the most influential of the chiefs in bringing together this coalition of Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Lakota warriors, and bringing about what was one of the greatest native victories over the U.S. Army in the entirety of the Indian Wars in the 18th and 19th centuries. So here's how the action came about. In the spring and summer of 1876, the U.S. Army converged on the Little Bighorn Valley in 3 columns. Colonel Gibbon coming from the west, General Terry from the east, General Crook from the south. The intent was to triangulate and corral the Indians. Since they were nomads and very, very mobile, the Army wanted to come in from different directions to try to pin them down before this big Indian village scattered. They wanted to defeat them and put an end to the war very quickly. That's Custer's part in this. He was with General Terry's command. He rode ahead with the 7th Cavalry, scouting out the location of the big Indian village and intending to surprise them and drive them into the arms of Gibbon and Terry so they could be defeated. Well, what happened is the Indians discovered Custer's movements, and surprise was lost. But Custer decided might as well attack anyway, and he did, and much to his surprise, there were far more Indians there than he expected. 1,500 to 1,800 warriors against his 400 troopers. And he had even divided his command into 3 columns. He took the largest, 210, and he left others under the commands of Major Reno and Captain Benteen. Each of them saw action. Reno's command was almost wiped out, just like Custer's was, but they were able to hold out for 2 days and finally were relieved. So this battle was a tremendous but short-lived victory because it galvanized the nation into action to give the army all that they needed to defeat the Sioux, the hostiles. And by the end of 1876, all of them were either back on the reservation or had fled to Canada with Sitting Bull. And within 5 years, Sitting Bull would have returned and surrendered as well because there just wasn't enough food in Canada to feed all the people. Why did the war happen? By the way, 1876 was the centennial of American independence. By the strange, ironic twist of fate, President Ulysses S. Grant was in Philadelphia to dedicate the centennial exhibition there when news of this battle happened. No wonder the nation was outraged. All right, but why did the war start in the first place? Well, the roots of that go back to 1868, the Treaty of Fort Laramie, where the Lakota Nation agreed to a reservation that covered what is now half of South Dakota, and in particular, the Black Hills of South Dakota, which was their sacred terrain, the center of the nation, holy place to them, a place of refuge and abundance, a place where they could connect to their creator, where it's tied to the origins of them as a people. It is the heart and soul, the center of the Lakota Nation, and they were not about to part with the Black Hills for anything. Well, that's all right. The U.S. government agreed to it. But then in 1874, Colonel Custer led an expedition to survey the terrain of the Black Hills. Guess what? They found gold. And when people find gold, they go crazy. Sure enough, there was about to be a gold rush, and the United States government tried to intervene and offered to buy the Black Hills from the Lakota. The Indians said no, not at any price. Therefore, the government upped the ante and said, okay, you have to get onto the reservations by the 1st of January, 1876. Any Indian who's not on the reservation by that date is considered hostile. Of course, the Indians said no, and most of them were not on a reservation. Therefore, the United States went to war against them, and that was the Great Sioux War. And when it was over, they had lost the Black Hills, and then through further actions and renegotiations of the treaty, they lost more and more of their territory until now what you see in red is all that's left of the Great Sioux Reservation, a fraction of the originally agreed upon territory. It is just one of the 300 treaties that the United States has broken with Native peoples over the last couple of centuries. What are we to think about that? What do we hold sacred? Well, that's part of the question that brought the two cultures into conflict. You see, Natives look upon everything as sacred because it's all connected to the Creator who has established everything and every person in a place where it is supporting one another, a cosmic dance, so to speak. Animals, for example, in this case, the buffalo, the American bison, they provide food and clothing and shelter for the Plains tribes, but it's more than that. It's a spiritual connection. They recognize the life within the buffalo resonates with the life within the human, and they each have a part of nature, of the creation that their Creator made. And therefore, the Indians don't take a life unless it's necessary, and if they do, they still honor that life that was given, that they themselves might be able to live. There's no wanton destruction. Is that the case in we who have come from European cultures? Well, we do value nature. We value the creatures of nature, but we value them according to what use we can derive from them. For food, for sport, for work. Or perhaps if it's not to bring value to us, perhaps it can be deprived, or we can deprive a resilient and resourceful enemy from using them, which is why millions of buffalo were slaughtered in the 1870s to cut off the Indian from a supply of food. It worked, sadly, and the American bison was nearly driven into extinction. But what about terrain? I've mentioned the Black Hills. Yes, sacred to the Lakota peoples. Every native person has, a native nation has sacred terrain, something that's special to them, that they go there because it is special. It is part of their definition as a people. What is sacred to we who have come from the dominant European cultures? Well, again, of what value is it to us? Can we grow crops there? Can we grow cattle there? Can we take minerals from the soil? Is there something, some value, some purpose that we can derive, even if it is perhaps a playground for public recreation, or even a monument to our own greatness built on without regard to the fact that the same terrain is sacred to another culture? Yeah, we did that. And we've done it more than once. But what about people? Do the natives regard people as sacred? Absolutely. The most sacred of all. And particularly the elders, because they are the embodiment of the people. They carry the wisdom, they carry the stories, they carry the identity, and they pass it on to the children so that they can grow up and carry it forward to that generation. And the chiefs carry honor, not so much what they have done in battle, but because of their wisdom, because of their foresight, their leadership, their compassion, their kindness. They are worthy of honor. They are people of honor. And therefore, people are sacred. Are they sacred to us? Yeah, sort of. We have value standards. But in our case, it's not understanding where different types of people fit together in the Creator's intent, in his design, but do they come up to our standards? And if not, then perhaps they're a little bit less of status, maybe even a little bit less human. Yeah, we do tend to think that way, even unconsciously, which is why if a certain person or set of people gets in our way and opposes us from getting to what we want, we will push them aside or neutralize them, or perhaps even eliminate them without mercy, as happened to the last of the Lakota resistance in 1890 at Wounded Knee. And it's not just there, but it's elsewhere. See, the curse of knowing history is you know the bad stories. And I could tell you a lot of them. But this comes back around to the question, what is sacred? And it's a relevant question to right now, because we are being asked what really is sacred. And all those things, all those people, all those symbols that we held dear as symbols of the greatness of America. Now there's question, is it really that great? Is it really that good? Whether it's Thomas Jefferson or Ulysses S. Grant or Christopher Columbus, there's a question, is it really good? Were they really good? What they stood for, is it really as great as we thought? It's a valid question. One could say this is just desserts. We did this to other cultures, now it's being done to us. What do we think about it? Are we angry? Are we outraged? Are we violated? Well, now we know how the Native people feel. Now we know how African Americans feel. Now we know how many others feel. What do we do about this? Do we respond in anger? Do we push back? Do we resist? And in so doing, perpetuate the violence, the miscommunication, the misunderstanding? Or is there a better way? I think there is. And for that, I want to go back to the Little Bighorn. You see, when you go to the Little Bighorn National Battlefield, you will soon see something else dotting the landscape. Yeah, there are the 7th Cavalry headstones, but now there are red granite headstones. And in the last few decades, these stones have popped up in places where Native warriors fell. Now, after the battle, their families gathered up their remains and they laid them to rest according to their own customs. But traditions and stories have been passed down so that where these warriors fell can be identified at least close to the actual site. So headstones are erected to honor them. And then you'll see when you get to the 7th Cavalry Monument and look off to the north, there's something else there, a monument you wouldn't have noticed right away. Because in native fashion, it's built down into the earth to be part of the landscape, not to dominate it. This is the Indian Memorial, finally completed and dedicated in 2014. And it is a circle, because the native worldview is to look on everything as a circle, connected one to another, and connected all to the Creator. You enter this from paths that go down into this circle from two sides. When you get in, as you look to the north, you will see this sculpture. Native woman sending her men off to battle. And that's a fitting monument to those warriors who fell defending their way of life. But that's not all, because when you turn around and look in the other direction, you'll see this. It's called a spirit gate, and it looks directly on the 7th Cavalry Monument. And you might ask, why in the Indian Memorial at Little Bighorn is there this window that opens up to the 7th Cavalry Monument? Well, the purpose of the memorial embodies this thing right here. As Enos Poorbear says, if this memorial is to serve its total purpose, it must not only be a tribute to the dead, it must contain a message for the living, power through unity. And here's how that's done. In true native fashion, this spirit gate invites the spirits of the warriors of the 7th Cavalry to come in and be one with the spirits of those who fell from the Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Crow, and Arikara nations. This is not a matter of theology. This is a matter of honor. This is a way of saying, we are two separate peoples. We were enemies in life, but we can be joined in honor and in recognition of our place, each of us, in our Creator's design. It's a restorative, healing, honoring thing. And that's the better way. Let me offer a few recommendations if you want to find out a little bit more of native stories on this continent. One of my favorites, and there are some good Indian movies out there, Last of the Mohicans, 1992. It's based on one of the first great American novels by James Fenimore Cooper early in the 19th century. It is set in the 1750s during the French and Indian War. This is a very sad story, but it's a story of honor and of dishonor. Watch it and see what you can pick up on the native understanding of honor. Then I want to recommend a newer film. This is from Canada, just in the last few years. It's called Indian Horse. This is a very sad story and a very ugly story, but it is a story of redemption. You may not know this, but up until the last decades of the 20th century, the United States and Canada both had a policy of Indian resident schools, boarding schools where Indian children were taken from their families and forced to learn English and the dominant culture's ways, forbidden to speak their native languages. They were forced to dissociate themselves from their native cultures. It produced tremendous trauma in these children, trauma that they carried throughout their lives. And this is a story. It's from a novel, but the novel is based on true situations. It's eye-opening. It's alarming. It is something I don't recommend you watch with your children because it's what has happened to the First Nations of this continent. It's a story that needs to be told because, as ugly as it is, it's part of our story. It's part of the story that connects us. And we need to know it so that we can make things better henceforth. Finally, I want to recommend a book by my friends Kalminik and Sakina, Warfare by Honor. This explains what the native concepts of honor and protocol are, why they are important, and how we can move into them ourselves and use them to good effect. This is, in many ways, what we see in the Apostle Paul's exhortations to us from Romans 12. And he's speaking specifically to the disciples of Jesus Christ, the body of Messiah. We're all connected. Each of us serves a purpose in our God's intent, in his design. We should function according to our purpose and help others to function according to theirs. And as much as we can, live in peace, live in shalom one with another. That means don't repay evil with evil, but by all means, overcome evil with good. And that's how we make things better. And that's how we're going to get through this current crisis. Well, that's what I have for you today. So for Founded in Truth, this is Al McCarn. Thanks very much for listening.